It's time for the news.
Since last night and early today, the Zionist occupation forces have committed 53 massacres in the Gaza Strip in the non-stop bombardment considered the most intense since the start of the aggression 22 days ago, in addition to cutting off all communications and internet networks. The United Nations General Assembly has adopted a resolution calling for an immediate, lasting and sustainable humanitarian truce in Gaza. And on the occasion of the recovery of sovereignty over both the Algerian radio and television, the Minister of Communication, Mohamed Lagab, has called on national media to work with abnegation and to produce more programs to strengthen media sovereignty. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. As we said in the headlines, since last night and early today, the Israeli occupation forces have committed 53 massacres in the Gaza Strip in the non-stop bombardment considered the most intense since the start of the aggression 22 days ago, in addition to cutting off all communications and internet networks. This came in addition to the killing of 377 persons, the majority of whom were displaced persons forced by the occupation to go to the south of the Gaza Strip, which it claimed were safe areas. The toll since October 7 in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank has risen to 7,814 dead and 21,693 wounded. Hospitals in Gaza have also so far received 1,800 reports about missing people, including 1,000 reports about children who are still missing under the rubble. Earlier, the chairman of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Kamel Hawash, said the world powers don't treat all peoples equally and their bias is flagrant when it comes to the sufferings of Gazans. Let's listen to him.
Let's draw a similarity. If Russia did this against the Ukrainian people in a particular city or region, the Western world would be up in arms, saying this is illegal and we must go and support them. What we find is when it comes to the Palestinian people, the duplicity of behavior, the double standard is evident. The latest was this afternoon, hearing the leader of the Labour Party, which is the opposition party, who is likely to become the next prime minister, who is a human rights international lawyer, actually say that Israel has a right to self-defense. And when asked whether it was okay for them to cut off water and electricity supplies and so on, he actually said yes, which is completely inhuman, and it's completely wrong coming from an international law specialist. But also the UK government has been completely quiet. What they have said is simply Israel has the right to self-defense, and that is clearly at the expense of the Palestinian people in Gaza, who've endured 16 years of a blockade anyway, which is an illegal blockade, but now the people will be starved.
Kamel Hawash added that if a ground invasion takes place, it will add to the already blatant massacres committed by the Israeli occupation against Gazans in front of the whole world.
The Israelis are building up forces around the Gaza Strip, the tiny Gaza Strip, and they are threatening to conduct a ground war. Their premise is the only way for what happened in terms of the 7th of October and other incidents, the only way to stop that is to completely, get rid of Hamas. However, to do that, if they think a ground war will do that, they step back in the past because they feared what would happen to their soldiers, and I think they will think that again. However, when you see the Americans supplying them with the most sophisticated and deadly weapons possible, they could embark on killings of the civilian population first, and then, if you like, pave the way for an invasion. I obviously hope for the Palestinian people's sake that doesn't happen, because at the end of the day, enough people have lost their lives, both on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side in the last few days, and I don't wish to see anyone lose their life or be injured in this injustice, which is what Israel has been doing to the Palestinians since its creation.
That was the chairman of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Kamil Hawash. It is worth noting that 110 medical personnel have been killed since the start of the aggression on Gaza. 55 ambulances were destroyed, 54 health institutions were targeted, and 12 hospitals were put out of service, as well as 32 primary care health centers due to targeting and running out of fuel. The Minister of Telecommunications and Information Technology, Ishaq Sidr, has said that the interruption of communications and the internet with Gaza or in Gaza is caused by the Israeli bombardment of the last two international connection points with the Palestinian enclave. Asia Bakar has more details in this report.
In an interview with Palestine TV, he said that the Gaza Strip has become separated from the outside world. Since the first day of the aggression, he said massive damage was caused to the infrastructure, including the communication network. He explained that what happened yesterday was the bombing of the last 2 points designated for international connection with the Gaza Strip, which led to cutting communications and the internet with Gaza internally and internationally, which indicates the depth of the crime committed by the occupation forces. The minister stressed that the disruption of communications within the Gaza Strip will affect many services, especially health services, warning that ambulance and help calls will stop. He confirmed that he has begun making the necessary contacts with International Telecommunication Union and other international actors and is keeping them informed of the situation, urging for urgent intervention. The minister stressed that cutting off communications deliberately has serious indicators, mainly to silence people and obscure the image of the crimes of genocide and ethnic cleansing committed by the occupation army. He expressed hope that action would be taken quickly so that the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip would not be deprived of sending distress calls or documenting the crimes committed by the occupation. The communication minister explained that the occupation continues to destroy all aspects of life in the Gaza Strip, including the infrastructure of the communications sector, holding the international community responsible and calling for immediate intervention to stop the aggression and protect civilians.
And the United Nations General Assembly has adopted a resolution calling for an immediate, durable, lasting and sustained humanitarian truce in Gaza. The Jordanian proposed resolution was adopted by the General Assembly with 120 votes in favor, 14 against and 45 abstentions. The resolution had the backing of more than 40 member states. The resolution called for an immediate, lasting and sustained humanitarian truce and demanded all parties to comply with international humanitarian law and continuous, sufficient and unhindered provision of essential supplies and services into the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority welcomed the resolution as emphasized by the permanent representative of the Palestinian to the UN, Riyad Mansour.
We are grateful that the General Assembly, the bigger house, for all the nations, the small and the big, the poor and the rich, the General Assembly was more courageous, more principled, and the President of the General Assembly, he was a brave man, met with us in the morning, and he defended traditions and norms of the General Assembly in dealing with issues related to the maintenance of international peace and security that required two-thirds majority, and the General Assembly prevailed and sent the appropriate message, not only to the Palestinian people that there is justice and fairness and international humanitarian law upheld by the General Assembly, but also it sent a message to everyone: enough is enough, this war has to stop, the carnage against our people has to stop, and humanitarian assistance should begin to enter the Gaza Strip with at least 100 truckloads of humanitarian assistance, and to stop the crime against humanity of forced transfer.
Riyad Mansour also stressed that by implementing the resolution and stopping the war, innocent Palestinian lives will be spared.
The General Assembly resumed special emergency session declared calling for a ceasefire, which means that this is the first body of the UN with authority that is calling for that. So therefore, this war has to stop. There is an articulation by a very important component of the United Nations, and it's a message from the General Assembly to the Security Council that the General Assembly acted, and they will take the decision of the General Assembly to the Security Council so that the Security Council to wake up and to shoulder its responsibility and also to act in sync with the General Assembly, and Israel has to obey. There is no such thing as is not binding. Whatever we decide in the international community, whether in the Security Council or in the General Assembly in general or in the form of a resumed emergency session, should be binding, and it is our collective duty not to accept this continuous rebellions by a member state in refusing to honor and respect the decisions in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations.
It's worth noting that prior to the vote on the resolution and amendment, the UN General Assembly resumed its debate on the issue, with many speakers stressing the deteriorating humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Now, Amnesty International's Senior Director of Research, Advocacy, Policy and Campaigns, Erika Guevara Rosas, has said that Israel's total communications blackout puts civilians in the Gaza Strip at even greater risk, and it means that it will be even more difficult to obtain critical information and evidence about human rights violations there. Asya Bakar has more details.
The Amnesty International officials said the Palestinian civilians are already besieged in the occupied Gaza Strip and are now also trapped in a complete communications blackout, with data from internet monitoring networks reporting signals rapidly failing as air and ground strikes reportedly intensify, in particular in the northern and central part of the Strip. She called on the Israeli occupation to put an immediate end to indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks which have already killed and harmed so many civilians, including 3,000 children. Amnesty demanded that internet and telecommunications infrastructure must also be restored as a matter of urgency to allow rescue operations amidst Israeli pounding airstrikes and expanding ground operations. She said Amnesty International staff lost contact with their colleagues in Gaza, and other human rights organizations have found it increasingly challenging to document violations due to the intensity of the Israeli attacks and restrictions on communication. This communications blackout means that it will be even more difficult to obtain critical information and evidence about human rights violations and war crimes being committed against Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and to hear directly from those experiencing the violations. Recent internet outage detection and analysis reports have established that Netstream, one of the last remaining network providers in Gaza, suffered a major outage on Thursday, while also reporting a complete outage of Netstream signals yesterday at midnight local time.
And as of Friday, 15 internet service providers in Gaza have faced near-complete outages, affecting their landline, cellular, and internet communications. The Palestine Red Crescent Society reported having lost contact with its entire operations room in Gaza, severely hampering its emergency services, including dealing with the victims of Israeli attacks. Amnesty reiterated its urgent call for an immediate ceasefire by all parties to the conflict in the occupied Gaza Strip, and Israel to prevent further losses of civilian lives and to ensure access to life-saving aid for people in Gaza amidst an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. And back to Algeria, where the Algerian radio celebrates today its anniversary coinciding with the memorable date of October 28, which is a major date for Algerian radio and television. It's a date which evokes the anniversary of the recovery of sovereignty over both the Algerian radio and television. We would like to seize this opportunity to congratulate the staff of the Algerian radio. We would also like to hail the efforts made by the Palestinian media outlets to show the atrocities committed by the Israeli occupation in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, despite the internet cuts and the flagrant bias of the majority of Western media. And on the occasion, the Minister of Communication, Mohamed Al-Agab, has called on national media to work with abnegation and to produce more programs to strengthen media sovereignty. During a tribute paid on the occasion of the 61st anniversary of the recovery of sovereignty over radio and television, Mr. Al-Agab urged all national media to work selflessly to achieve media sovereignty, adding that more information and programs should be produced with a view to strengthening media independence out of loyalty to our elders. Let's listen to the Communication Minister.
We are here today to proudly evoke a memorable anniversary, rich in meaning and extremely important, and to take pride in the recovery by our elders of sovereignty over Algerian radio and television. This memorable event does not only represent the fact of removing the occupier's flag to replace it with our flag, that of independence, but it has a great political and strategic dimension, given that independence and sovereignty are an indivisible entity that does not tolerate compromises. Political independence could not be total without the independence of media, in particular through the recovery of sovereignty over radio and television. The current media wars, biased and guided, as well as misinformation, miscommunication, the spread of lies and fabricated images, in particular of what is currently happening in the besieged Gaza, is an example of the historical event that our ancestors experienced, the heroes of Algiers' media sovereignty.
And Mr. Al-Agab paid tribute on the occasion to the memory of the martyrs of the glorious War of Liberation and all the Algerian journalists who died during the revolution or after independence. It's worth recalling that the Minister of Communication was accompanied by the advisor to the President of the Republic in charge of the General Directorate of Communication, Kamal Sidi Said, as well as directors and executives of several national media bodies. And finally, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has affirmed that Algeria retains with great pride the contributions of her women who marked her history. In his speech during a plenary debate session at the UN Security Council on Women, Peace and Security, Attaf said that 23 years ago, the Council adopted the historic decision 1325, enshrining the recognition by the international community of the vital role of women, notably in terms of prevention, preservation, and mitigation of the effects of conflicts, and the implementation of peaceful and lasting solutions to conflict. The Algerian foreign minister paid a vibrant tribute to the Palestinian women for their resistance against the barbaric aggression of the Zionist occupation in the besieged Gaza Strip and for their courage in the face of what is going on against the Palestinian cause. With this, we come to the end of this news bulletin, and before moving on to our special program, let's remind you the major headlines. Since last night and early today, the Israeli occupation forces have committed 53 massacres in the Gaza Strip in the non-stop bombardment considered the most intense since the start of the aggression 22 days ago, in addition to cutting off all communications and internet networks. The United Nations General Assembly has adopted a resolution calling for an immediate, lasting, and sustainable humanitarian truce in Gaza. And on the occasion of the recovery of sovereignty over both the Algerian radio and television, the Minister of Communication, Mohamed Al-Agab, has called on national media to work with abnegation and to produce more programs to strengthen media sovereignty. And with this, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for our special program devoted to or compiled and presented by my colleague Asia Bakar, devoted to the event or the recovery of national sovereignty over radio and television, compiled and presented, as I said before, by my colleague Asia Bakar. As for me, I'll meet again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin. Until then, stay tuned to Radio Algeria International, and bye-bye for now.
The workers of the Algerian radio and television celebrate on October 28th the anniversary of the recovery of national sovereignty over the two enterprises. This date is an unforgettable date marked by the courage of a handful of Algerian journalists and technical engineers who took responsibility of the Algerian radio and television so that this national institution keeps functioning after the abrupt departure of the French staff in 1962. The sudden departure of the French staff came in reaction and protest against the replacement of the French flag over the building by the Algerian flag after Algeria's hard-won independence. The French authorities ordered their staff to leave the building of the national television and radio at once, but Algeria succeeded in maintaining the broadcast of programs dealing a blow to the French aspirations. Earlier in time, during the Algerian Revolution against the French colonization between 1954 and 1962, Algerian mujahideen or war veterans were aware of the role of radio and television then for promoting the Algerian cause and making Algeria gain international support. The role of radio was also important to break the information blockade imposed by the brutal French colonization to shush the voice of Algerian people. Radio and television were a means of information and propaganda at the service of the Algerian Revolution and legitimate cause, especially that the socio-economic conditions at the time were marked by illiteracy and poverty. Radio was also a strong tool to counterattack the false propaganda of colonial France and to bring the Algerian people around the objective of national independence and sovereignty. The radio Sawt al-Arab, Arabic for the Voice of Arabs, in Cairo, dedicated 3 programs per week starting in 1955 to Algeria in both Arabic and French. For its part, the Tunisian radio also broadcast 3 times a week a program entitled Hear the Voice of Revolutionary Algeria. The Voice of Algeria became then also heard from Damascus through the program The Voice of the Revolutionary Algeria, and in 1958 from Baghdad and Tripoli. In Libya, Tripoli radio station and the Benghazi radio broadcast 3 programs per week devoted to the Algerian cause. Many people joined the revolution thanks to the radio programs and the news they used to receive from students, veterans, and members of the National Liberation Front. All these historical facts shed light on the power and impact of radio in Algeria's history. This wireless machine that transmitted the voice of hope and freedom conveyed by the people who believed in the nation's cause and wanted to further promote it. With the development of the Liberation War, especially after the holding of the Somam Congress in August 20th, 1956, to better organize the revolution, the leaders of the Algerian Revolution started considering the creation of a radio emitting from within Algeria. On December 16, 1956, 2 years after the outbreak of the revolution, the secret radio was created on the Algerian west border under the motto, "Here is the radio of the free and revolutionary Algeria." The voice of the Liberation Front talks to you from the heart of Algeria. The programs of this radio were centered on information on the battles of the war veterans, political and military commands, patriotic songs, as well as religious sermons that encourage people to commit to the country's freedom and independence. There were also programs on the history of Algerian people. French authorities multiplied efforts to cover up the revolution and tried to jam the programs of the radio and even to bomb the radio station. The French colonial army attacked the station of the secret radio twice without success, the first in April 1957 and the second in July the same year. The bombs fell out of the station's zone. With the availability of some developed communication machines made in America, the revolution started broadcasting with a better quality material. Following the creation of the Algerian Provisional Government in 1958, a focus was laid on the importance of promoting Algerian culture and art through the secret radio. In July 1959, the secret radio started broadcasting. The reopening ceremony of the station is hosted by late Issam Saoudi, known as the Sublime Voice of the Algerian Revolution.